we do what we can one by one to help the Emils of the world find a chance at happiness. Hi, this is Mike. Welcome to another episode of BAMMER Tales. First off, please let me apologize for the frog in my throat. I went to Florianopolis, Brazil last week for its carnival holiday and to meet Jean Dalabrida, the Brazilian model that I met and had a one night stand with on New Year's Eve in Hong Kong. You can listen to that episode earlier segment of this podcast series. In the event, I went to meet him and his husband and spend a week down there and had a great time. But as a result of all that travel, I have a frog in my throat. Today's episode is going to be the second half of Emil's story. Just to bring you up to speed quickly, the first episode detailed how Emil, not his real name, from a country in the area of Central Asia populated by Stan countries. He was beaten and tortured, imprisoned, and raped multiple times over a number of day period, and it came out of it missing many teeth, knife wounds in his side, etc., and barely escaped out of there to Turkey, where he settled in quasi-legally for 3 or 4 years, working without papers and trying to find a way to a more permanent solution. Being LGBTQ in his home country is virtually a death sentence. So this is where he found me on February 2020. And he proceeded to begin telling me his story. When I heard everything that had happened to him and how bad his luck and his life had been to that point, I figured out I've got to find a way to help him. So I came up with the idea of putting together a GoFundMe campaign to raise funds for lawyers to try to help him find a country that would accept him for asylum. And I began putting that together, unfortunately, at exactly the moment that COVID hit the world in early March. And by the 15th, everything was shut down, and no one was going to pay attention to a mild, modest GoFundMe campaign for this sort of thing. Everyone's attention was focused on Trump and COVID and the economic recession that was spinning out as a result of COVID and the Black Lives Matter reaction to that. It was just, it was a hellish nightscape for getting attention on something as small as one guy's story. So I decided I had to pivot. I've worked for 30 years in the LGBT nonprofit space on boards of directors. One of my close friends in that space referred me to Rainbow Railroad's executive director, Kamali Powell, in Toronto. Rainbow Railroad is an organization that helps LGBTQ refugees find asylum, find places where they will be free from the discrimination and harassment and physical violence in their home countries. For those who aren't familiar with it, Harriet Tubman was responsible for founding the Underground Railroad that helped black slaves in the south part of the U.S. escape through a network of houses, one by one, all the way from the south to the north until they got to places where slavery was illegal. And this was founded on that theory, but for LGBTQ refugees. And they have about an $8 or $9 million budget a year. They help 5, 6, 7,000 people make it out safely from their countries to safer places. They have applications of 15,000 or more a year. They unfortunately can't help everyone. But in any event, I contacted them and I was referred to their director of programming. And I spoke with her and she suggested I have Emil file an application online and they would take a look at it and see what they could do. No promises given. I gave those instructions to Emil. He filled out an application in March of 2020. We waited to hear back, and he heard nothing. By June, I was worried, so I contacted Rainbow Railroad to see if they had any update on his situation. And unfortunately, they didn't have an application from anyone with the email address he uses. So he had to file it over again. So there we were in June of 2020. Now, one thing you ought to be aware of, passports have a 10-year life on them. His passport had, by the time we got going, about another year, year and a half left. But that meant we had less than a year for him to be able to find some alternative. Otherwise, he couldn't go anywhere. During that period, over about a 9-month wait, Rainbow Railroad tried a number of things. They got one pathway they thought might work in March of 21, and it fell through. And then in May of 21, they came up with a route. And it was very secretive. I was allowed to be his proxy, and by him signing something authorizing me to get the inside information that he had. And even then, they didn't tell us everything, because the methods they're using must be kind of skirting the edge of legality in some of these countries. They're certainly trying to do something that maybe those governments would be opposed to. So we didn't know everything. But the route they chose was through 3 countries and 3 or 4 planes over a 2.5-week period, with Rainbow Railroad paying all of the hotels and airfare, which means per person in their mill, there's about a $10,000 average cost of doing this work. And finally, on the morning of May 6th, they called Emil and told him to go to the airport in Antalya, where he was living, carry only enough stuff for a vacation, fly to Istanbul, and from there I will hide the rest of the itinerary. But they had him go to different places and end up walking up to the customs authority in the final destination and apply for asylum. At that point, his baggage and his phone were taken from him. He was put into a holding facility with other applicants over a long weekend, and the only thing he was allowed was to make 2 calls a day to someone back in his home country. And he chose to call Maxim, a Ukrainian refugee who had become his boyfriend and who he had hoped to marry. I have to give you the forewarning, that relationship did not make it through this mess. Maxim was his contact point while he was in that holding facility, and I had never dealt with him, even though I'd heard about him from Emil. I suddenly got messages from Maxim updating me on Emil's status. And on Tuesday, after that Thursday arrival, he was given temporary residency in this European country. They told him it would take 6 months to a year to process and determine if he would be given permanent residency. Ended up taking 3.5 years. And the reason for those delays are many, but I think bureaucracy, COVID, the general antipathy towards immigrants around the world that was rising during that time, and the influx of many Afghan refugees and Ukrainian refugees from the wars that were ending or beginning there. And so it made the people's work in this European country that much harder. So finally, in the fall of 2024, Emil was given permanent refugee status in the country he had adopted. During that time, he had taken language lessons in the local language. He'd gotten further certification in his culinary field and was working in different jobs. He'd met friends and been befriended by people. Among his friendships were 2 gay men in their 50s, a couple that had been together for 25 or 30 years. And they welcomed him into their life, into their non-nuclear family, but also introduced him to all their blood relatives, and he's become an accepted part of that family. They were even willing to adopt him if the government would have let them legally. What he went through in prison, being raped repeatedly, being knifed, being beaten, that he acted out mood swings, bad nightmares, etc. And there were some tough moments for them all, dealing with him as he dealt with those traumas. Now it appears things have leveled out a bit, and Emil's on his way to a new life with new friends, new job prospects, and no fear of being punished for his sexual orientation. We do what we can one by one to help the Emils of the world find a chance at happiness. Please be part of the solution. Thanks for your support. This is Mike Balaban, signing off from BAMMER Tales.